Welcome back to County Connection. For our final segment of this February episode, we are going to be talking about some new protections against wildfire in our neighborhoods in Summit County. And here to shed light on the topic are Dan Schroeder from the Summit County CSU Extension Office. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
And Don Reimer from the Summit County Planning Department. Welcome, Don.
Thanks for having us, Julie.
All right, so Summit County recently made some changes to its regulations in order to better protect our communities from wildfire. What was the genesis of this process?
Well, so several years ago, and we've noticed this for years, we've had a countywide wildfire protection plan for a number of years. Our comp plans have discussed it on the periphery. It's been a little bit in our codes. It's always been a little bit in the building codes about the idea of defensible space. But several years ago, actually in 2014, a consultant approached the county and said, you know what, we've got an opportunity maybe to tie these together a little bit and make the zoning code talk to the countywide wildfire protection plan a little bit better and talk to our master plans a little bit better. So they developed a number of recommendations that would help us do that.
Okay, and so ultimately, some of these regulations found their way into our land use and development code. So what are some of the highlights of the changes that were recently adopted?
Certainly. So in the land use and development code, there was a number of, we added some things to chapters 2, 3, 8, 15s. We actually didn't have a definition
I
of...
love 3.
Yeah, three's the best one of all of them. But chapter 15, for example, is our definitions. We didn't even have a definition of what a wildfire mitigation project would or could be, but we allowed it in certain zones. So there was some of that was just some cleanup things. But in chapter 2, which is talks about master plans and what needs to be in master plans, we added something about the impact of wildfire, and that should be addressed. When we're considering a rezoning, our rezoning policies, we specifically said, hey, if we're going to upzone an area, we need to specifically look at the impacts of wildfire when we're doing that. Same thing with subdivisions. When we're subdividing area and creating a lot, making sure that there's going to be adequate defensible space on each of those lots.
Okay, and so what are some examples of defensible space requirements that we might be thinking about or looking about in these scenarios?
You know, under subdivisions, for instance, if an applicant comes forward and would like to, review and look at creating a subdivision, we have a forest management plan that is required this time that may not have been beforehand, and that really lends itself to adhering to the Zone 1 and Zone 2 defensible space requirements, and that's a matter of pushing the forest back from what will be the developable land and really creating a more wildfire resistant environment for when the developed or the built environment, the homes, end up being put there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then when landscaping comes into play in design, so is that a factor when plans come into the planning department or other departments in community development?
Certainly, and Dan can probably describe some of the wildfire friendly plants a little bit better than I, as the master gardener guy. But certainly we into the new chapter 3, our zoning regulations, we did include a whole list of wildfire plants that would be appropriate for both zones 1 and zone 2. And Dan, do you have some examples of a couple of those?
Really the examples fall right into what occurs naturally. So the native plants that exist here are fire resistant naturally, and so that would really be what people are looking to put into their yard. Now, of course, the conifers, so we have our spruce and pine and fir, all of those are going to burn really well. Mm-hmm. But they are native plants to the environment. So we start running into this gray area where what is fire-wise, and that would be a plant that holds more moisture and is more fire resistant against those things that are naturally inclined to burn, mm-hmm. and how they all work here together. So when we get really down to the landscaping, right plant, right place is a really good approach, but also it's a matter of these defensible space zones and really not planting anything that would be highly flammable within 30 feet of the house, mm-hmm. for zone 1. And then we talk with homeowners about landscape, development, subdivision, feathering the trees away from the home out to the property line. Zones 2 is 30 feet to 100 feet, so it's 70 more feet away from the drip line of the house. And then beyond, if your lot is that large, zone 3, So really creating clusters of trees or plantings so that there is space between them. If a wildfire were to encroach on the built environment, our communities, it wouldn't have enough fuel to continue to carry.
So really we're talking about strategies that slow the spread of wildfire towards a home, and then also giving some space for firefighters to carry out their work in the event of a wildfire or a structure fire.
And that's something we didn't talk about at all. But yes, creating a landing where firefighters can do their work. They have a safe space, and you can have a really beautiful garden with a whole variety of plantings and different species type. So we don't want to make people think that this is nuking my land and it's just going to be a zero-scape and I may as well move to Arizona. No. I mean, we can really have a beautiful landscape and be fire-wise at the same time.
Okay, great. Any other highlights in the Land Use and Development Code that you would like to mention?
There's a couple, and some of this was a little bit controversial as we were going through the public hearing process. A lot of what we've heard as planners, and we're not fire experts certainly, so we talked to a lot of the fire department people and wildfire experts. And one of the things that we heard is, a lot of times you might even have a defensible space, but if your structure isn't hardened, it's maybe vulnerable to fire. If you have firewood stacked next to the house, that's a potential source where a spark from a fire could land, start your house on fire, even if you have the best defensible space around. So some of those things are we built into the code a little bit too. Of between the months of May 1st or the time of May 1st and November 1st, the fire season, we do require that you have firewood stacked either 30 feet away from the home or covered with a fire-resistant tarp that you can get at Murdoch's or any of these other fine stores.
Okay. Don, can you talk a little bit about what hardening means? You mentioned hardening a building to
using more fire-resistant materials. I mean, a lot of our building codes already have had these in place for a while, but I mean, it's common sense stuff a lot of times. I mean, you use maybe an asphalt shingle or a tile shingle for your roof rather than cedar shake shingles. I mean, those are kind of gone the way of the past, but some people still like the look. So going to metal roofs and things like that, because that's where a lot of sparks will fall, embers will fall.
Sure.
We do have, a lot of times, we don't have a lot of fences up in Summit County, which is great. I kind of actually like not having fences all over the place. But if you do have a wooden fence, there's actually a situation where the fence can act as almost a wick that leads a fire to the house, because it might catch out on fire way a ways and then go to the house. So we did include a requirement that if within 5 feet of or within 10 feet of the house, 5 feet of that has to be a metal or a like an iron gate or something like that, rather than a solid wood fence. So there's ways, common sense and relatively easy ways in order to make your house more resistant to fire.
And so we just, through these changes, can ensure that some of that thought is taking place on the front end before some of these kind of less protective conditions kind of get installed.
And we all know a wildfire occurs here. I mean, we got a nice wake-up call July 5th of 2017, and people recognize that wildfire can happen directly adjacent to our neighborhoods. And so you're right, this is very much a matter of keeping people aware of the issue, being proactive, especially when they're doing a development, always on the front end rather than reactive. And suddenly you're trying to throw buckets of water on a fire when you could have had a non-combustible fence within 5 feet of the home that would have made the difference.
Right.
So this is all prevention, it's long-term, and it's now built into the code.
Yep.
Excellent. So one of the other areas where we recently made some changes was to the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. Can you talk a little bit about that, Dan? Sure,
I'd be glad to do that. The Community Wildfire Protection Plan was originally written in 2006, and so we had a baseline of goals and objectives, and it's a matter of the groups, the stakeholders that work together, being all the towns, all the fire departments, the county, and these are our marching orders, and really it's how do we make sure that we're doing what we think was or is the best strategies for the county. And so we just have the 10-year revision. Every year, it's a working document, so every year we revise it, but we had a major revision which was really driven by maps. So we had the GIS department and a variety of other sources help us reevaluate the landscape. And so what was a low probability of fire happening back in 2005 or 6, a lot has changed since then with mountain pine beetle, with the forest sort of unraveling in some sections and trees falling down. A lot of the manual cutting and thinning that's occurred throughout the county has changed the landscape regime. And so what we're finding is a lot of the work that we've done is beneficial, that around our communities, and these maps have shown, that was once high fire danger is now maybe moderate to low.
Great.
And so that was one great major outcome of the Wildfire Protection Plan revision, was a reassessment and a redrawing of all the maps.
Okay. And so with being able to look at the Community Wildfire Protection Plan and to see those updated maps, is that something that you use then to prioritize your work and pick areas to focus on moving forward?
You know, we do, and we call them the focus areas, in fact. So we have 27 identified zones throughout the county. And to be perfectly honest, they're where the people live, primarily in the river bottoms. The zones were drawn in 2006, and they remain somewhat similar these days, because really what we're looking at is protecting our built environment, the communities, from wildfire. And there's, as Dawn mentioned, there's always more work to be done, and it really falls into the realm of maintenance. So even if a lot of fuel reduction has been created throughout neighborhoods, we have to make sure that annually we mow the lawn or the wild grasses that would be growing there. Little trees, if they start to come up, that looks wonderful initially, but it may not be the strategy that you're trying to deploy on your land. So we want to cut those kinds of things and keep the landscape a little bit more clear of vegetation. So in case and when we have another wildfire, our homes are protected.
All right, great. So if folks are looking for more detailed information on these changes that we recently took effect, how can they go about finding out more about it?
Well, they can call Dan. No, they can call myself or Dan, certainly. And I mean, the county website certainly has a fair amount of information on both on the countywide wildfire protection plan. The zoning code amendments, you'd actually have to kind of dig into the zoning code a little bit. To assist landowners as they're developing their properties, we have created a handout that we can provide either at time of build out or building permit, or any other times anybody's interested, that kind of goes through and highlights some of these ideas on defensible space and 10 feet between crowns and some other things. Certainly, you can. The fire districts all do some inspections at the time of any home.
Certificate of occupancy,
seal or whatever else. So certainly there's a lot of opportunities there, but a good place to start is Dan.
And we were joking a little bit, but that's true. The CSU Extension Office does house a lot of the wildfire prevention work that Summit County does. And so if people wanted more information about Chapter 3, the exciting chapter, or the other places where modifications have occurred to the code, I'd be real happy to talk to folks.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks to you both for coming in and shedding light on this topic.
All right, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And thanks to those of you at home who've joined us for another episode of County Connection. We'll look forward to seeing you next month.